Okay, Keanu, can we start with just a quick introduction? Just tell me who you are and what do you do at 2U?
So at 2U, I am the accessibility lead. So I provide accessibility consultation to everyone. And sometimes that involves me actually doing the work or showing them how to do it so that they can move forward with continuing on with the work. I wouldn't say that I have the responsibility of ensuring that something's accessible because that falls on each team. However, when they fall into a snag or if I'm doing an audit, that's when I come into play like, hey, you guys, we need to put some captions or some transcripts here, things like that. That's where I come in with the consultation. I actually started because Rachel, I don't know if you know her, she reached out to me on LinkedIn about a year ago and she's like, we need help with accessibility. Do you mind having a conversation with my supervisor? Just a conversation with him about how we can get some help in this. And I was like, okay. She was like, it's just a quick 30-minute conversation. She didn't say it was an interview. She didn't say it was a job or anything. And so me and Mike just talked. We talked for like an hour. And I was telling, I love to talk. So I was telling him about everything. Then about a month later, he hits me up on email. He's like, hey, Keonda, we got a new position that just popped up for you. Can you come do those things that you were talking about? So that's how I got on. And that's pretty much what I've been doing for the last year.
That is amazing. That is so cool. It's almost, yeah, almost like it's meant to be, I almost want to say. Okay, so next question is how does inclusive design benefit all users?
So I would first say that, assuming that we're focusing on digital spaces, right, as opposed to physical spaces, I'm defining inclusive design as technology, as a technique of applying the best practices for, if you want to, let's just say you want to consider the most ubiquitous group of individuals is necessary when you're creating your digital spaces. Like, for example, Adobe and Microsoft, their most recent research, it indicated that digital spaces and products that are designed inclusively, meaning for everyone and all abilities, all individual differences and technology access, they got 4 times more consumption by the end user, and it had a better effect on their bottom line and on the organization's reputation. So this ideology, it typically it results in a competence of our digital citizenship, I would say. And that's determined by how we share information and how we interact with our virtual environment. And as leaders, technically as leaders, this citizenship, or I would say this leadership responsibility, it's composed of the principles, perceptions, the capabilities, and the practical knowledge, and how we comprehend accessible technology that's required. And I would say to intentionally or conscientiously make sure that learners can navigate our products and that there are continuous advancements in our digital domains. And we want to mold these technologies to not only meet our needs, but also to meet the needs of any potential consumers that we may have down the line. So that inclusive, we want everyone. We don't want just those who are disabled, and we don't want those who are not disabled. We want everyone.
Great answer. We do want everyone. Okay, next question. How are you ideating universal solutions for specific disabilities?
Ideation. Oh, I love that word. I love that. I'm going to add that to my arsenal of words, but probably should look over your questions, right? So I would say that think about universal and inclusive design, right? They go hand in hand. And if if we think about universal and inclusive design, then we know that universal design is the conception of solutions and environments for consumptions by everyone to the highest degree possible, while not having the need to adapt, adjust, or specialize the design. So if there's an adaptation and any type of adjustments required, then it's no longer universal or accessible. It's then considered as an accommodation. An accommodation and accessibility are not the same. So we want to stay away from accommodating, and we want to stick with making everything accessible. And regarding universal solutions for digital spaces, with special consideration to those who I consider as differently abled or who consider themselves as differently abled, we got to consider the barriers that are faced by online learners who identify with low or no vision. If using screen reader technology, which is text-to-speech technology, they may find it problematic when recognizing specific document components, particularly if there are no alt text on the graphics, or if there are long hyperlinks, or the content, it has forms in it that are not fillable, or it has tables that are not without headers, and the tables are only used for formatting purposes. Therefore, they don't have any headers. And these individuals, they may use what we call assistive technologies. For example, screen readers, you may find some users that are incorporating JAWS or NVDA, talkback or voiceover, to access their digital content. We are working with students here who are using those technologies to access their courses. So we know we have learners who are using that. And our solutions must ensure that we are designing with consideration to the technology functionality and what the technology can do, in addition to what we can do. We need to consider the needs of individuals with low or no vision, not only just the needs of the technology or the needs of our organization or what the capabilities are. We also have to think about their needs, and we also have to think about the needs of those who do not consider themselves as differently able, who may consider themselves as able-bodied. There are tons of individuals who identify, also think about those who are saying that they have limited mobility or dexterity. They could find challenges with cluttered layouts or small buttons or interactive objects. And these individuals, they may access our content using the assistive technology devices like touch screens, maybe, or head wands. They may use switch devices. This is where at the press of a button, they can switch, like they hit a button and it switches between programs and devices. And also they may even use what's called a sip and puff mechanism, which we became most familiar with that when we saw Christopher Reeves use it. When he was moving his wheelchair around, he would use a sip puff device. Some individuals also use that to navigate digital content. So let's also consider these individuals with diverse cognitive abilities due to autism or dementia, traumatic brain injury, and they could find obstacles with digital objects containing moving elements, page layouts, or atypical navigation. And our solutions must make certain that the color contrasting meets WCAG guidelines. We got to make sure that there are adequate spacing between the letters without the use of justification. And we must ensure that we are selecting the optimal sans serif type of font. And that always can be confusing on the difference between serif and sans serif. So like Times New Roman is a serif font because it has a notch, and sans means without a notch. So sans would be like your Calibri, your Verdana, because that font is very, Arial is a sans serif, but if it has a notch, then it's considered a serif. And we kind of want to stay away from that. And there's also a dyslexia font available. I just don't want our 2Us to feel overwhelmed because there are tons of resources, I mean, seriously, that are available to help guide us through the universal and the inclusive design. You know, those are some of the universal solutions that we need to, when we're ideating, we need to consider those things and things that we need to keep in mind as we are coming up with ideas.
Then also building on this ideation question, the next question is, how can designers think more inclusively when brainstorming and ideating solutions?
How can they think more inclusively? Oh, great question. Well, I would say creating or ideating solutions, in my opinion, is a notch above brainstorming. Am I right in that? I'm personally not a fan of group brainstorming, nor do I contribute my best ideas in any of these type of sessions. And specifically, as sometimes too many voices in my head could block any type of practical solutions or even production. As some individuals may become derailed and lose track of either what they are saying, what someone else has said due to being distracted, and diversions that are caused by, multiple thoughts being voiced, there's also a risk to this type of thought process or thought methodology. It's called a group think phenomena. This is what we want to avoid as opposed to individuality. Groupthink is where the herd mentality kicks in, and it results in a tendency where everyone will just adopt the majority perspective or way of thinking. So with that said, my personal experience as example, these sessions and all, they must be inclusive and universally designed. Even when we're ideating or trying to think of ways to come up with these solutions, we need to make sure that we're doing this in a way that is universal and inclusive. And this can mean the option of individual mind mapping, where some can concentrate on a topic or an issue in the absence of a group of enthusiastic and or excited peers, how they're like simultaneously throwing out their ideas for one another, usually at the same time. Some may find the option to mind map as more productive. I said production. Another alternative is maybe we want to offer designers an opportunity to conduct brainstorming or ideation with individual thought sketches, especially considering that we're talking about designers here. These sketches can be assessed by the group members individually. They can choose which idea they prefer and then come together with a discussion afterwards. This method, it also could solve circumstances where a robust and collective culture is not developed. So let's just say some of the employees are new and they're not comfortable voicing their ideas in a large group. But lastly, I'll say that in order to make these sessions a little bit more inclusive themselves, we can't forget that ideation is not the same as developing a solution. And brainstorming and ideating is where we want to get the team together to quickly generate ideas. We want to seek buy-in. And as best said by one of my favorite speakers, Art Sandoval, he said, ideating and brainstorming are not for solutions, but they are the seeds to a potential solution. And that's because it quickly gives us an understanding and the environment of the issues to rapidly investigate areas for potential solution. There's a lot more ideating inclusive solutions for an issue, and I always recommend referring to scholarly texts regarding design thinking and any way that our designers can do some individual research and come up with some ideas and then bring them with them to the group instead of just saying them, outright when the group meets, because sometimes that is not inclusive.
Great answer, fantastic. Okay, next question. Does the user testing process differ when designing for people with disabilities?
Oh, user testing. I've worked with those who are differently able in testing, and The ADA does require certain businesses to make accommodations for people with disabilities. However, it also now requires accessibility, and web content must be accessible to those who consider themselves as blind or low vision. And there's a difference between blind and low vision, right? And so we got to accommodate both of them, deaf users and those who navigate by voice, screen readers, or any other type of assistive technology. And although in many cases, using automated and manual testing strategies is sufficient to identify and to address any potential accessibility issues, it can be helpful to have the users with disabilities or others, such as, think about these individuals as testers. The aging population, they can be used as a site in addition to other auditing strategies. Actual users can turn up a variety of potential accessibility issues. And depending on the audience, a user tester and could include a few people with different accessibility needs, such as a person who considers themselves as blind, right? They're using the magnifier if they're low vision, or they're using the screen reader if they're blind, right? Or if they have the motor impairments, they're using speech recognition and switches, possibly, to navigate through web content. So user testing by individuals with diverse abilities, it can provide a unique perspective in regards to ways of how we navigate and access the content in any of our products, along with various views on the technology's functionality. That's experience and knowledge. It's needed. We don't have it a lot, and it's what we can use to help improve our digital content. It's relatively easy to find user testers through social media groups or disability and accessibility mailing lists, universal or design groups, or university accessibility services, organizations that serve those who are differently able. And people who are identified with various abilities, they tend to be receptive to testing when you're improving your accessibility. They're often willing to refer you to other potential testers. And as with any tester, it is of the utmost importance that they are screened for particular characteristics, including a good understanding of the web technologies. So they have to know the product you're using, because you don't want them saying, oh, it don't work, and it's because they don't know how to work it, as well as proficiency using their respective assistive tech. So they have to also know how to use their technology, just to ensure that they're having the tester experience is the best it can be during testing, and that it's not attributing to any problems with the web content or applications being tested, and not the result of inexperience with the web or because of their limited expertise with the assistive tech. And one of the best ways to gather information about a user's experience using your web content is to have them talk aloud as they complete the task. I've noticed I've had to do this with those of various abilities as opposed to those with one type of ability. I have them talk as they go through when I'm conducting research, and I record the verbal responses as well as any emotional responses or their facial expressions. And I just ask simple questions such as, what were you thinking when you did this? Just to determine their thought process. It may be preferable to video or audio record sessions and analyze them afterwards. So you can observe and focus your attention on guiding and probing the tested thoughts. Of course, we got to be certain that we're letting them know that we're doing that and that we're informing them that they're being recorded. But I found that as something different that I've had to use with those of various abilities as well.
Amazing. That's so insightful. Thank you. I've included this question, but if you don't feel it's relevant to your area of expertise, feel free to leave it out. But does the user experience research process vary when working with users with disabilities?
Okay, yeah, it's very similar to the last question, but I can always talk, Ilana. When I was interviewing, and I do a lot of UX research, and when I was interviewing blind and visually impaired individuals about how they use my clients' services, I learned that the app's voiceover coding was remarkably inconsistent. Images were missing alt text, which resulted in image file names being read aloud. The focus order was not always intuitive. And occasionally just things were not accessible to the screen reader at all. And these sort of defects made their way into the product because of inadequate procedures for designing, coding, testing accessibility features. But that lack came from an inadequate user testing. The defects I found would have surfaced in any number of contexts if only the company had made more of an effort to include blind users in their research and testing. Inclusive research, and it leads to inclusive solutions, and these are solutions that make a design work for various abilities and very often for all abilities. For example, one consistent pain point I observed while contracted at a ride sharing organization recently with blind users is that the customer they couldn't locate their ride when it arrived to pick them up. And the reason is because the company's app, and you would be surprised if I were to say the name of this company, but the company's app did not provide enough information to a blind user so that they knew where to ride. They didn't know where the car was. So anyone who was sighted, people can learn about the driver in a car that will pick them up because we can see it. We can see the car's route. We can see it being updated in real time, when you use your ride sharing app. And we can also see the estimated time of arrival, right? Well, blind users with voiceover, they were only able to get an ETA. Actually, that's not true. VoiceOver read out the car, the license plate, and the color. But since the user cannot see the car, the information is useless, right? Like you're telling me it's a blue car, it's a Taurus. That means nothing to me. But there is an easy and inclusive fix, code. If it was coded right from the start, then VoiceOver could have provided the distance of the car from the pickup point and tell the rider which direction the car will come from. These two pieces of information were consistently requested by users, specifically ones I interviewed, and it would have been remarkably simple to add this to the app design. And most importantly, for inclusive design skeptics, you can add this information and make this app accessible without changing any of the visual design aspects at all. So just think about that as a way like, oh, wow, if we hadn't used those type of individuals, they would have never known that this was an issue if we had never tested with those type of UX users.
Love that you said inclusive research leads to inclusive solutions. I love that phrase. That's amazing. Thank you. What a great answer. Okay. Now, the rest of the questions are just specific considerations you should include for specific disabilities. So the first one is, what are the considerations you should have in mind when solving for people with vision impairment?
Oh, vision impairment. So I guess users' needs, they're going to vary widely across people who have low or no vision, and one's user's needs may conflict with another user's needs. For example, an older person might need high contrast, but that might be unreadable to a person with light sensitivity. A person with good visual acuity or clarity might tunnel the vision, and they may need to make the text small so they can see more words at a time and to read it better. Whereas most people with low vision acuity, they need the text to be larger. And it's not uncommon for one person needs to be different from day to day. or even throughout the day. For example, when we're more tired, we may feel that larger text or a different background is best. And it also depends on the task and the amount of information that we have at our disposal that influences the user's needs. For example, when a person is typing an email, they may be able to have smaller font because they know what is being written and they are skimming for typos, as opposed to when the same person is reading an email, they need the font to be larger because they don't know what you're about to say. Therefore, thinking about these users, they must be able to adjust the user interface to meet these needs. An individual's optimum display for readability often requires very specific adaptations. For example, a person with highlight sensitivity and low contrast sensitivity needs to set the background and text colors that are not bright and provide sufficient contrast for them in order to see the content from day to day may change. And the characteristics of text that makes it more or less legible and readable are extremely interrelated. Meaning that one characteristic is dependent on the other characteristic. For example, a person with low contrast might not be able to read small text with a contrast ratio of about 5:1, but they can read text at a ratio when the text is much larger. Or with the same fonts, a person does not need to increase the letter spacing, but need to make the font larger. You understand what I mean by letter spacing? So the spaces in between each letter, they need to be more, but the text needs to be larger as well. So the user needs are grouped by they're categorical. Yet some aspects relate to different WCAG outlines, such as brightness, and we adjust brightness and colors, tracking, perception, spacing and reading, identifying key elements, the point of regard and proximity, and how we can work with the user settings. So just giving them the ability to adjust these settings is key to working with those users.
Very, very insightful. Thank you. Now the same question, but just for hearing impairments. So what are the considerations you should have in mind when solving for people with hearing impairments?
Hearing and improving accessibility to the hearing starts with examining how they're using our web products or our digital products, and the strategies that those who identify with auditory disabilities, the strategies they use vary according to the type and to the extent of their disability and the individual preferences. But at the maximum, we can provide transcripts for audio only content and also provide both captions and transcripts for multimedia content, such as video content and audio, right? So we're going to add transcripts for video and content, or audio and video content. We can, of course, provide transcripts. That's definitely a good idea. We have to make sure that the text content is easy to skim, not to mention highlighting, and that it kind of offers us SEO advantages for our products as well. Additionally, those who like to take notes, they have an easier time doing so when the text content is available. I personally use the transcripts myself to go back and review a conversation that I've had with someone. So I know that it is a benefit for all of us. YouTube offers some automated transcriptions and captions, and it's pretty good. And I mean, you also have your third-party transcription services such as Trent and Sonics and other people out there. But YouTube is good. The federal government only requires 80% and YouTube is about 90%. So it's gotten pretty good over the years. And like transcripts for audio content or audio only content, captions and subtitles, they benefit the public, everyone, anyone. And many viewers of video content, they're likely to be using their phones usually, and they're usually in a public place. And so they may have the sound muted. And this is true for popular platforms like Facebook and Instagram, and it's likely to become the norm for the future. So think about these individuals too, even though they're not technically identifying as differently able with hearing, they are also want to access the content in a way that we're used to accessing it. And if we take that away from them, they won't be able to.
I'm definitely one of those mute people on Facebook, and I do use that function so often. So that's so true. Okay, then basically the same question, but just for mobility impairments. So what are the considerations you should have in mind when solving for people with the mobility impairments?
Oh, yeah, that's a tough one because mobility impairment is a broad category of physical disabilities, right? It can include upper limb and manual dexterity disabilities and loss of fine motor control, or disabling conditions such as cerebral palsy and carpal tunnel syndrome. The abilities may be temporary. They may be in a range of severe to mild loss of fine motor, all the way to quadriplegia. They may be the consequence of aging, an accident, heredity, disease, and these individuals may have limited arm and hand movement, or can just use one hand, or have a tremor, or have difficulty with fine motor skills, or be unable to hold a mouse. So not surprisingly, given the range of mobility and dexterity disabilities, a wide variety of assistive technologies are available for these users, including touch screens, head and mouth wands, where they can navigate through their head or using their mouth. Of course, the switch device that we talked about earlier. One-handed keyboards are available, oversized mouse and trackballs that are huge. I mean, like this big. Speech recognition applications like Dragon or naturally speaking. And what's most important to building an accessible product is the fact that many of these tools, they rely heavily on keyboard accessibility. That's something here at 2U we need to focus on. Meaning our users are only able to navigate using the keyboard only. So to improve this accessibility for these individuals, we would like to make sure that the functions can be accessed keyboard only. Everything must be accessed keyboard only, in addition to the mouse. Don't just have it keyboard only and I can't use my mouse, because I can't use this track thing here because it hurts, right? So I have to use a mouse. But then you have some people who can't use a mouse and they only can use the track, or they can only use the keyboard. We want to make sure our tab order is logical, meaning in America we read left to right, top to bottom. Some other languages are different. I know, like for example, Farsi is right to left, but if the American English, logical tab order is left to right, top to bottom. Provide methods such as skip links to navigate over any menus and navigation bars that is just clutter, which I just had a conversation about skip links. You can just put a little button at the top of the product that says skip link, meaning they can skip through that whole menu of home information. They can skip through all of that and go straight to the content. And we want to be careful with the use of keyboard shortcuts, because many of them, they conflict with our assistive technology devices and how the browser functions, like JAWS, I know. And we want to avoid the use of single keyboard access, as they interfere with speech input for Dragon and some of the other speech input devices. And we want to make sure that we provide logical, and standard keyboard commands for interacting with our products. Something we've not been that great at.
That's very, very insightful. Thank you. Then same question, second last question, and I have to left, is what's the considerations you should have in mind when solving for people with cognitive impairments?
So working with those who are considered neurodiverse, we want to help them understand what things are and how to use them. We want to use icons, potentially symbols, terms, and design patterns that are familiar to them so that they don't have to learn any new ones, because those who are neurodiverse often need common behavior and design patterns. For example, they may use the standard convention for hyperlinks, like underline and blue for unvisited, purple for visited, those type of things. We want to help them find what they need by making navigation of the system easy. We want to use a clear, easy to follow layout with visual cues. We want to use clear headings. We want to make sure the boundaries are clear, the regions are set up, and we want to help them understand the overall page design. We want to make sure that the context is clear, and this means simple words. It's called plain language. And WCAG actually has a whole section on plain language. Short sentences and blocks of texts, and just any easy to understand videos. And we want to help them avoid mistakes by providing a good design that makes errors less likely. And we want to ask them only for what we need when the errors do happen, which makes it easier for them to correct them. For example, if they're filling out a form and say they get one thing, they're missing a piece of information, don't clear out the whole form and make them redo it over. Happens all the time. It's very inaccessible. It's very annoying to everyone. So if they're filling out a form, or if they're filling out a form and they make a mistake, at least tell them where the mistake is. Don't highlight it in red necessarily. Tell them, hey, and I've been seeing some sites do pretty good with this. They'll have at the top of the site, oh, you're missing item number 6, or you're missing item number 3. Very accessible, very great idea. And they have it highlighted in red for those of us who are non-neurodiverse. We want to avoid distracting them from their tasks. So like if they're get disoriented, we want to make sure that they can get back to where they need to go by using breadcrumbs, and providing these breadcrumbs or links or headings can also help them undo any mistakes that they've made. So breadcrumbs are super important. And think about us ensuring that we're not doing processes that rely strictly on a memory. Like memory barriers, they sometimes stop those who are neurodiverse from using the content. And this means long passwords and a voice menu that involves remembering a specific number of terms. Just make sure that there's an easier option for people who need it. And we want to make it easy for them to also get help. If they have difficulty sending feedback, then we'll never know if they are able to use the content, or when they have run into a problem. We can also support different ways to understand the content, the graphics, the summaries of long documents, adding icons to headings and links, and alternatives for numbers are all ways that we can provide any type of extra help and support. And we want to also support any type of need for adaptation and personalization they may require, such as their add-ons or their extensions. We don't want to disable add-ons. We don't want to disable extensions, because they can sometimes get extra support through those items. And we also want to test with those users. We want to test with these users as well.
Amazing. I hate it when I make one mistake and the form clears. That's so annoying.
And it's so inaccessible and against the law.
I see it's 6 o'clock now. Do you have Time for one more question. I'm just you're cognizant of your time. I don't if you've got something else.
No, I'm fine. I'm here for you.
Okay, perfect, fantastic. Okay, then last question. What are the considerations you should have in mind of solving for the aging population?
Oh, yes, very important. Even for my parents and my grandparents who are technologically savvy, and many older people have age-related impairments that can affect how they use the web. Like they may have a decline in their vision, which means reduced contrast or physical abilities, their hearing, cognition, or fatigue, things like that. They just may get information fatigue. And these issues overlap with the accessibility needs of people with disabilities as well. So websites, applications, tools that are accessible to people with various abilities is most likely going to be accessible to those of our aging population. And many of these individuals, they require large text like we talked about. And we want to make certain that the text can be resized without using assistive technology. And we want to make sure it's resized up to a certain number of 200% without them losing any of the content, like if it's 200%, is the words going to fall off the page type of thing. And the text style and visual impacts makes it easy for them to read, especially if you're not experiencing a loss of vision, but you're experiencing a decline in vision. Your visual presentation, it includes requirements on the text style, the justification, line spacing, line length, horizontal scrolling. Oh my goodness. That's from using a cell phone. Like if you take a web page that's on the web and I'm looking at it on my cell phone and I have to do this to read the rest of the sentence, that's not good. I shouldn't have to go from side to side to read the rest of the sentence. I should only be doing up and down to read the entire sentence. And because most of our aging population, their color perception changes as they get older, they may lose that contrast sensitivity. So we want to make sure that our color is not only used as a visual means of conveying information, but or to indicate an action. We want to make sure that it's not prompting a response or distinguishing anything, which is why I said don't only just highlight it in red, because if you highlighted the error in red, then you're missing out on some other individuals. You can highlight it in red, that's fine, but also have it in words so we can see exactly, and not even red, like a dark burgundy. Make sure the contrast is 4.5 to 1 if it's under 16 points. And if it's over 16 points, it must be 3 to 1. I had to make sure I had that right. That's WCAG's standards, a fairly new standards. Is very important because many older people have also their hearing and vision. They also need transcripts, captions, low background sound. And we got to remember how we're using these new captchas. We've been captchas have been so bad that I have not been able to understand some of them. They're like, oh, for security, can you type in these letters? I'm like, what does that say? I can't read them. And then I'll hit the refresh. You know how you hit refresh, like, give me a new one, or can you say it out loud? And I'm like, okay, I'm 40 something and I'm struggling getting through this. I can only imagine. I have a grandmother who uses the internet regularly and she's 84. So I can imagine. So please, let's be conscientious of how we're using our captchas. We don't use them a lot here at 2U, but if we do, then just be conscientious of how we're using them.
Amazing. That was such a great answer. That's it from my side, all my questions. Is there anything you'd like to add, or think you feel like we haven't covered properly?
There are a lot of resources out there that can help 2U as well as non-2Us. I specifically like to refer people to the WCAG standards 3 The reason why is because 2.0 is going to go away in a few months. 2.1 is going away, and 2.2 is going to be deprecated. We're going to be using WCAG 3.0 as of next year. Those are standards that the federal government said we must do. I will say start there. If there are issues with understanding WCAG's language, which it shouldn't be because we made sure that it was in plain language, consider going over to what's called WebAIM, and that's WEBAIM.org, I believe. WebAIM is really good at explaining each of them in a very detailed, plain language way, especially when it comes to things like alt text or anything else you need to know about. WCAG also explains it, but sometimes it can be a little cumbersome and overwhelming. But I always refer people to start with W3C's WCAG, which is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 3.0. Double A are the ones that we are held liable for. I know, I'm so specific. My whole month of law school, and now I'm a lawyer. But yeah, that's what I would, if I had to give any advice, I would say understand that, and that would let us know what we need to be doing in our day-to-day development of content for our learners.
I love that. That's such practical advice. Thank you. And it gives a great starting point. Yeah. Fiona, thank you so much for taking the time. This was super insightful and given me a lot of food for thought, and I'm sure our students will also learn a lot. So thank you so much for this.
You're very welcome, Ilana, and thanks for inviting me. And let me know if I can do anything else to help your team out, or if I can help you guys out with anything dealing with accessibility or anything like that. You know how to reach me. I'm here for you guys.
Fantastic. No, I'll definitely reach out, and I'll also send a copy to the video for you before we use it, just to have your okay on it.
Okay, great.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.